I'd like to start with you, Amanda. The last words of the Dressing Door record, The Dressing Doors, is the voice of a woman who says, I'm telling you a fairy tale. How does that relate to what you're telling us in your records, in your songs, in your blogs, what you do?
Oh, well, that's a good question, but I don't think I should answer. I think that's up to everyone else to answer. I like the fact that everybody takes something different away from art, from music, and from songs and stories. I just loved that. I loved that recording, that little snippet of that's my grandmother, right before she died. And it's funny because it's taken out of context. She didn't know I was recording her, but I was recording her. We were sitting out on the porch of my parents' house, and I was telling her how I'm not really a smoker, I only have a cigarette a week or something, and she said, Amanda, you're telling me a fairy tale. It was about smoking. It was about like the most mundane thing possible. But I don't know how to answer a question like that. I don't like answering big questions about art because I think you can't. Honestly. I mean, I think you can sit here and you can say 10,000 things, but I don't think questions like that have any answers.
I think that's a good answer.
And there's your answer, which is the absolute correct answer.
In the famous introduction of your Who Killed Amanda Palmer tour is how about you died many times, in many different ways. Is the show sort of rebirth for you, or?
Oh yeah, that was kind of the idea. The Who Killed Amanda Palmer tour, the whole idea was that, you know, I started the show, you know, coming back to life.
When Neil wrote the stories, did you talk about the stories and how they would relate to the lyrics and the songs? Or was that separate?
That stuff wasn't really related. I mean, you could make connections the way you could make connections between any two things. But the book and the stories in the book were, if anything, you know, mildly related to the songs. It's not like Neil took the record and sat down and said, this story is this song and this story is this song. But he did the project because he liked the record. And he knew kind of what Amanda Palmer world looked like. So he worked within that context. And in that way, everything fits together. But it wasn't like a concept project with some grand, you know, beginning and end point.
You play the piano mostly. People say that artists have sort of special connection with their main instrument, as in that it translates part of what they think and feel sometimes unknowingly. How's that for you with piano? Is that coincidental?
I hate the piano.
You hate the piano?
Mm-hmm.
You play it every day?
No, I don't. I avoid playing it every day because I hate it so much. I only have to play it every day when I'm on tour.
Do you really hate the piano?
I have a very love-hate relationship with the piano because the piano to me has always just been a tool. It's been a songwriting tool. It's been a tool to, you know, create and grow as a musician. But I have never been passionate about playing the piano well. And I've never put time and energy into playing the piano well, which is something that I've struggled with and felt guilty about all my life. So, you know, the piano has done wonderful things for me, but I look at other musicians who seem to or claim to have these like wonderful, passionate, mystical relationships with their instruments, and I'm just clueless and jealous of them because I don't have that at all.
How's this for you?
Well, I mean, I'm very similar. I write songs. Usually, when I write songs or I think about music, it's not specific to an instrument at first. Sometimes there are exceptions, but generally the song is just kind of a thing. And then when I go to record it or I go to perform it, then it becomes a matter of figuring out the best tools to use to do it. And so I've got, you know, mainly when I'm touring, it's the guitar and the accordion I have with me, and I've got to try to figure out how to squeeze the song out of these instruments. And I love the instruments, but I don't practice. I feel like I'm really bad at them. I get really embarrassed when I'm around people that know how to play them, and people think I'm really good at them all the time, and I always feel a certain like, oh.
But that's a certain trick that I've come to take pride in, because Jason and I, we really are similar in this way, in that we do treat our instruments as tools more, more than loved ones, and. What's been an amazing experience for me lately is I've taken up the ukulele, but I don't even really know how to play it at all. Like I know, maybe 6 or 8 chords, and I don't even know what those chords are. I just know that they sound good, which is the way I taught myself piano. But you can take a song, or I can take a song that I've written or played on piano, translate it to ukulele, and go from one of the most complicated instruments in the world, with thousands of moving parts, the piano that weighs tons, to one of the simplest instruments in the world, which is just this little hollow wood thing with a couple of strings on it, and do the same thing to an audience. And the audience hasn't even really noticed or cared what the delivery system was. They just know that they heard this song, heard these words, saw the delivery, and felt something. And I think in that, it really depends what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to impress someone with your virtuoso and your skill on an instrument, that's one territory. And then if you're just trying to deliver a song or a message or an emotion, it almost doesn't matter what you pick up and do it with. It could be an iPhone with a guitar app on it, and you could still make someone cry. So, I think that the truly genius performers of the world are the people who do both.
That make people cry with their iPhones,
yeah,
and can play rock loud enough.
Piano.
You both tour a lot, right?
Yeah.
Do you have this place called home that isn't home, but just somewhere in the world? A feeling, or really a place?
You mean out and about while touring? Do we feel like that's a place?
Yeah. Do you feel?
I do. I actually am at a point where my rhythm and my sort of feeling of like sort of comfort and harmony in life, it's when I'm out doing my own, especially when I'm on my own, when I'm out touring and playing a show every night and meeting people every day and in a different city every day, that rhythm really works well for me for some reason, and I can sustain that for a long time. And it feels like I'm at a place, kind of.
I have had moments of that, but very rarely. I'm usually, but I'm unlike Jason, I'm usually touring with a crew and on a crazier schedule that doesn't have as much space in it for real life, especially with the Dresden Dolls, and especially, the most comfortable I've been on tour is when I'm touring like that, like alone, making random decisions, and basically not having to also run a road business at the same time. Because when you're running a road business, and this tour is a little bit like that, it basically just feels like every hour of the day is work.
Yeah.
And that is really just exhausting. And it's not an enjoyable way to live life. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's good to do, and you need to do it, but it doesn't sustain.
Yeah.
So when I do that, I find that I need to offset it with a lot of time away, like on the opposite side, just time not doing emails, not talking to people, not thinking about work, and just, living. But that doesn't have to be at home. That could be anywhere,
While you're touring, can you still work on new stuff together apart? I mean, you meet a lot of people. I guess you get into projects like that, or...
A little bit. It is amazing how you can be around people, all the time, working together all the time, and feel like you barely see them. Like on this tour, we've been around each other and all the time, but we've have a few little projects we've been needing to do while on this tour, and there's not any time.
Well, this tour is particularly rough because we've been doing long drives during the day, which is empty, non-productive time. Like, it's very, very hard to be productive in a car going from point A to point B. And, you know, that's just the nature of travel when when you book a tour. The minute you start leaving too much space in between the shows, it becomes a sloppy tour. But also the closer together the shows are, the more hectic the schedule is, and you wind up just, crammed together. That being said, we had a really good time in Berlin. We took 3 days in Berlin and had a day off before the show and a day after the show, and life slowed down for enough of a moment that I stopped going completely crazy and started feeling like there was, like a little crack of life in the sidewalk of touring hell.
You went totally crazy.
Yeah. It was great.
You said you stopped going crazy. Different crazy.
Yeah, different crazy. Yeah, there's work crazy. And in fact, that's often, that's a very bad habit of mine. When I'm touring and I'm just working 24 hours a day and I don't get any time to myself, I start getting really pissed off. And then when I do get an excuse or a space of time to go nuts, I usually just take it and go off the handle because I want to obliterate the responsibility. So that's been a bad touring habit of mine for years.
There's a lot of time between your CDs, your own work.
Mm-hmm.
You're always involved in other projects. Do you write your own songs in that time, or is it just like at one point you sit down and say, I'm going to do something else for me?
It's always different for me. I feel like songs usually for me have always come in batches. And like for each album, they usually kind of come in 2 waves. Like usually like a handful of songs come right after I finish a project, and then another batch kind of start growing, and they're usually pretty slow, and they all, hopefully everything kind of makes sense together, and then I feel like I have an album. The last couple albums, it's been different though. I haven't felt that rhythm. The last album took a long time for me to feel like, oh, I've got a collection of songs and maybe these fit together. And right now, I've got a handful of new songs and a bunch of ideas, but it doesn't feel like an album. I don't know quite what's going on there. So,
we'll have to grow.
Yeah.
One thing you really have in common is the fact that people say of artists there are always some recurrent themes in their work, and from that sort of mythology is built how an artist works things, or maybe that's just what critics derive of what they find. In your work there's the idea of dying and your obsession with vegetation. How would you describe the most important aspects of what you do for yourself, where it all comes from?
She's asking you that question.
Well, it's funny, the vegetable thing, because I don't feel like there's a lot of vegetables in my work. But the second album, there was a lot of, like, I basically, had created this really dark album with a bunch of different sort of death images throughout it. But the whole time I felt like there was this other side that somehow it was going to burn through and end up being a really happy album. I don't know if this was like really well thought out on my part, but I had this idea of having this gospel songs about vegetables taking over the world and being responsible for our, immortal souls, and that I thought was really funny at that time, which is about like 11 years ago now. And so I had that song, and for some reason, I still call my car a tomato, and I have Camp Tomato every year, but I don't feel like vegetation is a really prominent theme throughout my music. But yeah, I guess later after getting asked that question a million times in different words, I did, the vegetables are kind of cool, like they live this very cyclical life. We plant them, they grow, they turn into things we eat, they give off little seeds that we then plant again, and it's a very basic creative cycle that plays out over a year and that is echoed in our lives and echoed in the way that we work on projects and create new things, and the way that we reproduce and give birth to the next generations and die. But I didn't initially think of it like that too much. I just thought vegetables are funny. People will be happy if I sing about them.
Is this idea of the cycle where the burial scene comes from, when you had yourself interred on Halloween?
I mean, it was similar things that I was looking at, and yeah, that did become a cycle, and yeah, I was trying to become more like a vegetable, I guess.
You're a vegetable.
It was a Michael Jackson reference.
They eat all for you.
You're a hors d'oeuvre or something. I think he says you're an hors d'oeuvre.
Awesome.
You made the album art yourself, of your CDs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Also of the cost of living.
Mm-hmm.
The image of the fire and the water with the burning house. I heard it a lot in the lyrics as well. Has it any special meaning?
I mean, I think that whole album was kind of being finished at a time where I live, I mean, very literally, I live in a little houseboat that I moved into right at the same time when I was doing the previous album. And so I had this, it was kind of those years of my life when I was working on those songs were all associated with this houseboat. But at the time when I was recording it, my neighbor, who was a big part of why that felt like my home, she passed away, and my house kind of felt very unwelcoming and not like my home anymore. But that was a very literal thing that kind of gave rise to that image. I think, yeah, this idea of your house burning down, of like a big change happening. I also in that time stopped doing that thing where I was being born and dying, which was probably a good thing, but also kind of hard for me. It was kind of clearing something out, and I still hadn't quite figured out what in my life as a person and as a performer was replacing that, or if anything. So I think, yeah, the album was kind of, it was just coming from a darker place, and I thought fire and houses are cool, and
Now you work together on the Evelyn Evelyn record. I heard it was written over a longer period of time. Did these songs and the concept grow organically, or?
We used lots of pesticides.
Yeah, we developed it in a lab.
Yeah.
It actually was written very quickly as far as the songwriting. But for the entire project to exist, had a long gestation period, mostly because we had to make little pockets of time to find each other, so we would work on a little bit very fast, and a little bit very fast, and a little bit very fast.
We recorded almost half of it and wrote almost half of it in a period of like 5 days, actually, when we worked on the original EP. And then we had about a week and a half, about 6 months after that, where we recorded most of it. And then there were a couple like sort of patch-up sessions we've had to do. But the main thing was we were kind of waiting to find out what we could do with the release and how we could release it before we could really it's very hard for me as a worker, like to finish something if I don't know where it's going to go.
I think everyone's pretty much like that.
Yeah.
I think it's also important for anyone looking at the project, kind of trying to figure it out, to understand that the reason Jason and I wanted to make it, I think, in a large part, was so we could make it together. It wasn't like we had to make this thing and it didn't matter how it got made. It was more like the record was an excuse for us to be friends, hang out, and have fun together. And so the album was more a product of us getting, finding the time in our lives to do that. And, we also, I think Jason and I, we met each other 10 years ago, but we didn't really start to become friends until maybe 4 or 5 years ago or something. And I think for two people who basically travel constantly. If you want to actually make a friend, you sort of have to do that. Doing stuff together is fun. Let's do it. But the project was more a result of that than the goal.
But it's pretty amazing. I mean, because we totally got to know each other over the course of this record. We our first times kind of hanging out again after meeting in Australia, we kind of met each other and kind of planted some seeds that became this project, and then our whole friendship pretty much initially grew out of the fact that we were doing this.
But it was also very deliberate, like the same way you deliberately tour with people that you want to hang out with. Especially the more and more you tour and you realize you can make strategic career moves to tour with certain people, but those are all the wrong decisions. The decision you want to make is to tour with the people you like and you want to be with, because that's your life. That people, those are your neighbors, basically. It's like choosing where you want to live.
And if it happens to be that those people also happen to be incredibly awesome, amazing songwriters, and
you do more stuff.
And that, I'm really blessed in my life with the people that I've been lucky enough to work with. Like, they are just incredibly good people at the beginning, and then also just so amazingly talented and diverse. And I've just gained so much and solidified so many friendships by doing these collaborations.
Will the project still continue? I mean, there's talk of a comic.
There's not just talk of a comic. The comic is very real, and it's coming out in the fall. And it's coming along beautifully. The artwork is being done by Cynthia Von Bueller, who also did the record art. And, after that, we may... there may be more. The twins might go to Australia next year if there's time, and if not, they might appear next summer at the Edinburgh Fringe or something. So, or they might disappear forever. It's kind of hard to say. They're very unpredictable.
Their plans, at least as far as they've articulated to us, they change a lot from one conversation to the next.
Well, they also don't. They haven't made it really clear whether they love touring or not. I think it's touring and travel for them is very uncomfortable, as you can imagine. So,
is it difficult to start working with people again after you've done a solo tour?
Well, I did a solo tour. The last time I was in Belgium, I was on my solo tour, but that solo tour was 10 people. And then when that tour ended, that was the album tour, and when that sort of ended, I was so sick of being around people and working in a big group that I didn't even take a tour manager with me, and even though I was playing big venues, I just said, everyone fuck off, I just want to do this stuff myself. But that's an enormous amount of work, and you can only do, you can do so much when you're just trying to juggle totally solo. And so I did a lot of wandering around, and I did a bunch of little gigs and a lot of spontaneous gigs through Twitter and stuff. But that only gets you so far, and you can only do so much with it. So I think I'll eventually cycle back and do more big group touring and smaller touring. But, I couldn't imagine ever doing the same thing over and over and over again and not getting sick of it. So, when I'm too alone, I start missing being in a group. And when I'm in a group for too long, I get sick of everyone and want to go and just focus on myself and my own stuff.
You can't actually read sheet music, right?
Just barely. I can, but it's very slow and arduous.
And can you?
I think it's funny. I'm a much worse piano player, but I think I kind of read a little bit faster. But we're both. I don't read
hacks.
Yeah.
Is it difficult then to work together with other musicians who have different approaches?
Only when they hand you sheet music.
Which has never happened to me.
You've never been handed sheet music?
Uh-uh.
I get handed sheet music sometimes.
Most of the musicians I know just call out chords, the international language of improvisational rock.
I hand out sheet music.
Really?
Oh yeah, for
records.
Well, for records, and like the concert in Seattle, like we hadn't really rehearsed together. I did sectionals with the strings and with the horns, and I had parts written out for everybody.
Well, yeah, I've had sheet music made for me to give to others.
Yes,
but I'm just it just flows right through me, and from the arranger to the string players or whatever. So it's about knowing the right people. Everyone needs classical friends, basically.
Or you can be like me, and I just, even things I'm not good at, I insist on doing them myself.
That's a very Jason Webley problem.
But, you know, I think I write pretty good. I do good part writing. It just takes me, you know.
All that time you could be spending on the internet.
I know.
What are you doing?
Time for one more question?
Sure.
Yes. Only if it's a really big philosophical question that, once again, we can't
We
answer.
started with that. So
Okay.
that's not fair.
I'm kidding.
No, a very earthly question about the internet, which you, especially you, use a lot. And especially last week when you were stuck, or that's 2 weeks ago already, in Iceland, no, in England, and your band couldn't reach you. You did a lot of
My band.
spontaneous things then. It has really opened the world for you, internet, I would say, for your career as well. And personally too.
Oh yeah, I mean it's opened up everything. I mean it's almost like opening up a floodgate of connections and information. It's so much.
You met your fiance on the internet?
I did.
About that, I can't help but notice, but the man you've worked with, they always end up in skirts. I mean, Brian did, and I you did. Now, when you're going to get married, who's going to wear the skirt?
Probably nobody. But if Neil and I get married in Scotland for some reason, he'll probably wear a kilt just for kicks. I could see him looking pretty sexy in a kilt.
You should totally do that.
Maybe that's the answer. Traditional Scottish dress. I find kilts extraordinarily sexy. Yeah. What I didn't tell you is actually I'm a superhero, and my special power is that I look at men
And they
all of a
get in
sudden
skirts.
they're wearing drag.